Thank you for joining us here at Work Comp Talk Podcast, a podcast dedicated to all the injured workers here in the state of California. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, make sure you do so. That way you can get notified every time we upload new content. And you guys can also follow us on social media for many tips and lots of information regarding the workers' compensation system for the state of California. I'm your host, Carmen Ramirez, and joining me is my co-host, Bilal Kassem, managing attorney here at Pacific Workers, who also happen to be our sponsors. If you are looking for legal counsel for your workers' comp, or you need a free consultation, you have a couple questions you want to get answered by professionals, then definitely check them out at pacificworkers.com. Today's topic is related to what many of us probably will suffer given the worlds we live in and all the office jobs we have. But carpal tunnel syndrome, is this covered in workers' comp? Is this considered a workers' comp injury, or did I just develop this because of age? How do you handle carpal tunnel within the workers' compensation system?
Carpal tunnel comes up a lot. It's probably one of the more common types of injuries we see. And there's no particular type, right? There's no set job that people get carpal tunnel from. You know, everyone defaults to like, oh, well, if you have carpal tunnel, it means you're doing a lot of keyboarding or office type work. And that's not the case at all. You know, anyone working with their hands can get it. And
I've seen
frequently.
The janitors, because of all the wiping or the motion they do with the vacuums and stuff like that, who also develop carpal tunnel. So
yeah, one of the most serious carpal tunnel cases I've ever had was a UPS worker.
What?
Yeah, and it was from constantly lifting packages and driving and doing all this stuff. And they had debilitating bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome in both their hands. Basically, you know, I don't want to say it's like you might as well have your hands amputated, but like
seriously,
it's kind of, that's how you analogize to it. You can't use your hands for anything because you're constant pain. You feel weak and
no power, no grip.
Yeah, it's terrible. And so you do see carpal tunnel in all walks of life, across any profession, across any age group as well. It's not limited to just, you know, people over a certain age or under a certain age.
Right.
You know, it's an indiscriminately painful experience that pretty much anyone can get from just repetitive wear and tear.
Dang. I'm glad you put it out that way, because I think for the most part we think about it. Carpal tunnel relates to secretary work, people that are constantly on the computer, bad posture. But now that you've defined, you know, I didn't think about it. The UPS workers, or in general delivery drivers who are constantly driving, even the garbage truck drivers, you know, they're constantly handling the big steering wheels, as well as like bus city drivers and all that. I guess I didn't think about it in the big picture, and that's why we have this type of conversation, so that we can elaborate a little bit more when it comes to carpal tunnel. Now that there's a lot more people working from home, there's a lot of confusion, and these questions come up a lot, which is, at what point is it considered an injury of carpal tunnel? And I'm going to give the basic example. If I was working in an office and then all of a sudden I'm at home, I no longer have the desk that lifts. I'm at home working out of my kitchen table. Obviously, my posture is not the same anymore. How does that come into play within the workers' compensation system here in California?
You know, it doesn't matter if you're at home or if you're on the job in your office. If you're doing work, you're on the clock. If you're not on the clock, you're salaried. You're just doing work, and you get carpal tunnel from repetitive movements, whether it's, you know, because you're working at your kitchen table or, you know, driving around a truck in UPS. It's all work comp related.
Yikes.
There's no difference. And the fact that you have a really bad setup at home, even if it's your fault, it doesn't matter. You know, workers' comp is a no-fault system, which means even if you have the ergonomically worst possible setup at your home office, you know, it's like a bar stool at your kid's
even
kitchen
better.
table
I
type
flipped
thing,
over
you know,
my
like,
hamper, and the bottom of my hamper.
You have your old
like...
moving box that you flipped over and use that as a desk. You know, even that's fine. You know, it's still covered by workers' comp. It doesn't matter. And you're right. We see these cases more and more where people are working at home, and you know, they don't necessarily think, oh, well, this is work related now, because they're at home, so their mindset's a little bit different. But
how does this come into play? Coming in from, you know, obviously carpal tunnel can hit severely. It's like this dull pain. I've had a few instances where I've dealt with it myself, And I even questioned it. And I was just like, maybe it's just arthritis because I'm cooking at home and my hands are over the stove and it's hot. And then I go and wash my hands with cold water. And there's all these conspiracies of if you go from hot and cold, like it's going to hurt your joints. Do people really connect the dots and say, oh my God, this is carpal tunnel versus this is arthritis? Like,
no, I mean, I think most people, they just notice something's wrong. And truth be told, if they're going to go get a diagnosis, there's going to be diagnostic studies that are done, like a nerve conduction study to measure nerve entrapment, things like that. And a doctor will ultimately diagnose it for you. But I think generally people say, I'm experiencing pain or numbness or tingling, in certain areas of my hand, shooting up to my elbow and things like that. They'll start to feel these things and they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to go get checked out. And of course, a doctor will tell them,
Bilal, we're in 2020 something. A lot of people self-diagnose after watching a TikTok video, and then they try to go get the pills over the counter. This is arthritis. I have arthritis.
Yeah, WebMD, people go down the rabbit hole. They start Googling all their symptoms, and what started off as a little bit of sore throat is now they have terminal cancer. And I'm not making fun of terminal cancer, but people will be their own worst enemy, and they'll get in their head and start thinking and thinking and thinking. If you are experiencing symptoms, please go get checked out.
Yeah.
Don't ignore it, regardless of what it is. And certainly don't rely on WebMD.
Or the Mayo Clinic. What is it called?
Yeah, I mean, Mayo Clinic's an established institution. They're fantastic, and nothing wrong with them. But people go through medical school and do a lot of training and go through a lot of experiences to have the knowledge to be able to diagnose and treat things properly. And a lot of these injuries become worse because people do try to self-treat. They do ignore the symptoms. They don't give themselves the rest or the professional care they need to get better. They say, oh, well, I've got some pain and numbness in my hand or whatever. I'll just take some Tylenol today, and then keep going. And then before you know it, it's severe, and I think carpal tunnel is one of those things where, yeah, you can rest and relax and be okay, but it's just kind of like it's short-lived if you're just going to go back and expose yourself in the same way. Carpal tunnel can be treated with surgery, for example. That's not something that you can do at home. So, there are things that are beyond most people's pay grade and experience. You certainly can't, take some Tylenol and bust out a kitchen knife to do your own carpal tunnel release. But hey, there's things you need to address with the doctor, and, you have to be cognizant of that.
The fear of people not knowing that it is covered by workers' comp. There's a lot of people that say they're not going to cover it. Where does that come from? Do you have an idea? Like, if you've had cases with people that don't necessarily think carpal tunnel is covered by workers' comp, where would that idea come from?
Experience, I think there's things called CT claims, cumulative traumas, in workers' comp, which is typically what you plead a carpal tunnel injury is. It's not a traumatic incident. I guess it can be, but for the most part, it's cumulative. Mm-hmm. Cumulative trauma cases are largely denied by insurance companies. And it's because most of these cumulative trauma cases are very casually brought up. No one's saying, oh, well, I'm having pain in my hands and wrists, and so I'm defaulting to this as work-related and I need to go see a work comp doctor. They're usually starting to experience symptoms, then they go see their own private doctor.
Right.
And their private doctor diagnoses them, and they're getting treatment, and they don't think to go to workers' comp. And then when they do go to workers' comp, there's no medical report that necessarily says that this is a work-related injury. They're just going there on the backdrop that they are experiencing these symptoms, so they treated privately, and now they want to open up a workers' comp case. And so a lot of times the work comp insurance carrier will deny cumulative trauma cases for that reason.
That sucks. But it doesn't mean that they're not taken. It just means you're just going to have to really get your ducks in order and, of course, find yourself an attorney that's going to be able to walk you through that process. Which is a whole nother monster to deal with. But for the most part, if you are feeling any type of symptoms in regards to carpal tunnel syndrome, you will get covered under the California workers' comp system. A great question that comes along with that is, what if I no longer work for that employer? And what if I'm out of work, because of cumulative trauma? Does that come into play?
It depends on the case. We have something called a statute of limitations, which is the time limit that you can actually file a workers' comp case. But there's varying degrees of what that actually means. Did you know you had an injury? And,
right.
How long was it since you knew you had an injury? Did you report it? how long have you been out of work? Was there other things that got in the way? For example, like maybe you didn't work for one employer and that's where you think the carpal tunnel was caused, but then you went to work for someone else. Did the subsequent employment actually cause your injury or the one before that? So there's a lot of legal and medical questions that come up when someone's reported or tried to pursue an injury after they no longer work for an employer. It's not impossible, but it's just a little more complicated and nuanced, that's all.
Interesting. Well, I guess carpal tunnel it is. If you happen to have those symptoms, as we mentioned again, make sure you do get diagnosed by a doctor. And then if need be, get yourself that workers' compensation claim started so that you can be taken care of. It's nothing to play lightly with. It is a dull pain. It's an excruciating pain. And you don't want it to get to the extreme before you actually realize you have it. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them down on the comments. If there's a topic or a specific injury you guys would like for us to kind of discuss a little bit more about, given the fact that, the company Pacific Workers does take thousands of clients all the time, and they've seen it all, if not more. So make sure you guys leave some comments, subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you get notified of our next episode. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you guys on the next one.